Welcome to the Born for Greatness podcast. I am so excited that you are here today, and I have a very special guest, Michael Richman, who is currently our EOS coach at the company I work for. So, Michael, thank you for joining.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So, you have a very amazing story, especially in the world of business. So, do you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself to get us started?
Sure. So I'm a lifelong entrepreneur, fifth generation entrepreneur. My family started off in the milk industry, and we actually, during Prohibition, one of my cousins was a famous gangster, Meyer Lansky, and he put my great grandfather into the milk business, and he used to bottle alcohol into white cans that the police couldn't see that there was alcohol in there, and would deliver it to speakeasies across New York City. But that ended up becoming a legitimate business that my family held on to until the mid 90s. And when I thought about what I wanted to do with my life, I knew that I always wanted to own a business. I always wanted to be a small business person. I thought that, and I still believe that small business is really the backbone of our economy and what goes on here in our nation. And so I thought the best way to learn about that was actually to become a commercial banker. And so I spent a few years as a commercial banker understanding finance and looking at what businesses need to do to really start making money and how that works. And so I spent a few years doing that. I decided that I wanted to go purchase my own business. And so I started looking all around. And if I could tell you some of the crazy businesses I saw, everything from a guy who wanted me to purchase a business that used banana peels for skincare and vegetable distribution. And so some really exotic things. And I ended up settling on a sign installation business. And I was ready to purchase that, was on my way to drop the escrow check off. It was that long ago. And he called me on the way and says, you know what? I changed my mind. I don't want to sell the business. And so I said, okay, I'm back to the drawing board. Maybe I'll be the banana peel skincare guy. And my father said to me, well, why aren't you in business with me? And I said, well, I never wanted to work for you, and you have a partner. And I said, I'll want to own my own business. And he said to me, well, why don't you make an offer to my partner, who's a silent partner, and see if he'd be willing to sell. And I did make that offer, and I bought that company, the 50% of the company. And it was a manufacturer of commercial awnings and poolside cabanas. And so that was what we did. Some of our big customers, Panda Express, Four Seasons Hotels, people like that.
That's fantastic. That's quite the story.
Yeah.
I love it. What brought you out of that business and brought you into being an EOS? Is it consultant or coach? I'm not sure exactly what.
So what happened was I was running this business alongside my father for years. I kept feeling like I was hitting the ceiling and nothing was happening. And actually, I brought my best friend in as the head of sales, and she told me, she goes, you have to join some kind of peer group. And I said, okay. And so I joined, she always knows best. She's been my best friend for a long time. And
Awesome.
she said to me, you have to join a peer group. So I said, okay. So I joined a peer group, Entrepreneur Organization, EO it's called. And I'm part of this peer group, and they start telling me, you have to read this book, Traction, and this is going to change your business. And I said, I've had coaches, I've had consultants, I've had, you know, the business therapists, I've had everything under the sun that you can imagine come through here. And I said, you know, I've spent so much money with all of them that there's actually a boat in Marina Del Rey with my name on the back of it.
That's amazing.
Right? I said, I don't want to do that again. And so I read this book, Traction, and I said, the thing that I loved about it was the simplicity in the tools, and that rolling out the tools to the organization was not going to be a new $1 million ERP system or something that I was going to have to try to force down the throats of everybody who worked there. I saw that I could implement these tools and that people were actually going to get on board because I was giving them the rules of the road. I was giving them the rules of the game. So implemented that into the company. We ended up growing the company by about 50% in revenue, about 70% in EBITDA, and eventually had a successful exit. And I'd say that part of our successful exit was a lot of the foundations that we set using the EOS model. And so
That's
when I
awesome.
thought about, yeah, when I thought about what I want to do with the rest of my life, I'm like, I love small businesses. I love helping people. I love helping small businesses. What can I do to make that into a business? And I decided to help other businesses implement EOS.
That's amazing. What is one of like the biggest challenges you see that most small businesses face?
It's very simple. It's people. It's having the
Hmm.
right people in an organization and knowing that those people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. It is across the board. People, I'll go and I'll talk to a potential client and they'll say, "Oh,
Hmm.
you've never dealt in XYZ industry." And I'll say, "Okay, that's fair. I've never dealt in whatever industry that it might be, and I've dealt in a lot of industries, but there's a few that I haven't." And I'll say,
Hmm.
"What's the problem?" And they'll start telling me, "Does that go back to having the right people in your organization?" Well, yes, it does. Does that issue, could that be solved if you had the person who either knew what they were supposed to be doing, who had specific measurables that we were looking at every single week? Would that person be acting differently if they were following a process that's been documented and is replicable? Well, yeah, probably. And that's the issue, that so many of these things that happen in businesses are happening because not only do we not have the right people, but we're not giving them the right tools.
That's that is so true. I have found that over and over in the businesses that I've worked in. Um, but it is interesting because I feel like most people always go to the bottom line and it's sales or it's the income that's coming in the door or not coming in the door. It's very rarely, and also it's either the lower level and not lower level as in your less, but just like, the admins and those kinds of things, it tends to take the blame. How often are you seeing that it starts from the top?
Oh, I think a lot of times it starts from the top. And that's why when I work with teams, we start by figuring out first, what are the roles and responsibilities of the members of the leadership team before we even go down to the lower levels. Because
Interesting.
to me, those are the people, it's going to trickle down. So as the leadership team goes, the rest of the company is going to follow behind. And so
Mm,
there are issues in the lower level sometimes, but a lot of times it might be things like the person who's on the lower level of an accountability chart doesn't know what they're responsible for, and they don't know what they're supposed to be doing, or they don't have actual goals, or there's a misalignment in what they think they should be doing and what they're actually doing, and nobody's communicating that to them on a regular basis. So all of these things need to be happening because people is the engine that is going to drive that company forward. It's all about the people.
that is so well said. It is always all about the people. That's neat. I love the concept. I think it's worked really well in the companies I've used it in. Of course, you have to stick to it, which is super important. But I think it's a great tool that people can utilize, which is fantastic because I feel like small businesses really need a resource to use because a lot of times, in startups, even people don't know like what should I use, how should I organize my business. So having that kind of roadmap, I was trying to think of the word you
Yeah.
said, that is key.
Well, it's interesting. I have a friend who always says, she says, I love playing board games because when I play a board game, I get the rules at the beginning of the game and I know exactly what I need to do in order to win.
Mm,
And so if you think about it, we want to have that same philosophy when we walk into a business. If you think about the game of Monopoly, what do we need to know? We need to know how many pieces forward can the thimble move if he pulls this card. Okay, what does the thimble need to do in order to pass go and collect $200? There's rules, and once the rules are followed, everybody is having fun playing the game because they know now what it takes to win the game. So often in businesses, people don't know what it takes to win the game. So they're sitting there and they're spinning around in circles, and you have the person at the higher leadership level going, well, they should be focusing on this. And the person at the lower level says, no, I should be focusing on this. And so there's this total misalignment because they don't know the rules of the game. They don't know what they're supposed to be doing, and they don't know how to win the game. And whatever winning looks like is
a good
different
point.
for businesses, right?
If I was a skeptic, I'm not because I've used it, but Is it really that simple?
It can be. Things can be broken down into simple, into simple measurables, into simple tactics. People like to overcomplicate things, and I think that the overcomplication is sometimes another way that you have people start to fall down and not know what they're doing. Every person at the organization should have at least one number that they're responsible for. And I'll have clients tell me, I cannot think of a number for the person, the receptionist. And I'll say 3 rings good, 4 rings bad. It can be something as simple as that, but she, the receptionist, or he needs to know what the rules are for their position. Every person, we can bring it down so they know, what do I need to do to be excelling in the things that are being asked of me? And we need to constantly be thinking about that and constantly be sharing that with our employees, and then constantly be reviewing it with them so they know how they're doing and they see their progress on a regular basis. So
Yeah, that's important.
I think the simplicity of it is what makes it special.
That's very neat. How long, well, first of all, how long have you been an EOS
So I
coach?
started doing it. It's interesting. I started sharing these tools as a volunteer with, I'm a USC
Really?
alum. Yeah, as a with
Interesting.
USC. So I started doing it with businesses that were people who were graduates of USC, which is where I went to college. And they have an entrepreneur club that I was on the board of. And I started helping businesses as a volunteer. And I said, like, I wanted to see if I enjoyed doing it. And I really did. And I really got a lot out of it. And so I kept that trajectory going on and on until I built it into a full-time business after I exited from my old business. And, one of the things that is special about what I get to do is I get to see people playing the game of business every day, and they don't often
Mm,
see themselves, just like an athlete. They don't often see themselves, but I can see a different perspective, that sometimes when you're in the middle of a trench and you're in the middle of a situation or a firefight, which I hate that term, but a lot of business owners get in the middle of firefights and they can't see it. And it allows me as a third party, which is so special, to step back and take this experience that I had running my own business, experience that I had working with entrepreneurs and working in peer groups and things like that, and now working with so many businesses across so many different industries, is taking that experience and utilizing pieces and things that I learn in order to help each one of those businesses. And
that's
again,
great.
the interesting thing is a lot of times the answers are the same. It goes back to
Across all of the
across
industries,
the
you mean?
board, across the industries, across what's going on. Hey, on the accountability chart, should you be talking to
Mhm.
this person or should this person be talking to that person? Well, you're right, Michael, but I went around that person. Well, why do you think there's a communication issue in your company? I don't know.
Mhm.
I think there's a communication issue because you went around that person, and really that person is, you're supposed to be communicating to that person because that person knows everything that this person's doing all day long. And so, you see that. And again, it doesn't matter if that's in manufacturing, that's in
Right.
construction, that's in whatever, in insurance, whatever industry it's in, that's what you see.
I think that, and I would love to know your thoughts on this. But it is easy. The roadmap is easy. Why is it such a hurdle? Like, why is it such a struggle? Like, even, I mean, I think about this sometimes for myself. Like, I see the roadmap, but for some reason, there's like something there that, like you remind me often, like, what's the accountability chart say? Like, what is this person? What do you think that struggle is?
I think people tend to overcomplicate things because it's just human nature. We want to overcomplicate things. And so I
Mm,
always really spend a lot of time bringing back the basics to my clients. And I say to them,
mhm,
okay, it's on the accountability chart. What does the accountability chart say? Or they tell me this person's not doing a good job. Well, how do you know they're not doing a good job? And they look at me, well, I've heard from 2 other people. Well, wait a second, we set numbers for them. Are they hitting their numbers? Well, yes, they're hitting their numbers. Well, so then you're trying to overcomplicate this because you heard a rumor rather than this person is
mm,
hitting their numbers every single week. Okay. Or there's, we look at another tool and we say, how are they exhibiting our core values? Well, they're exhibiting all of our core values. Well, why do we think then that they're not a good team player? What do you mean they're not a good team player? And when you start to really dig into that and you look at the tools, a lot of times we realize that it comes back to innuendo and rumor.
Mm.
That human nature, I think, since we were in elementary school, since we were in middle school and high school, and we're all in these places together, and people are gossiping about who's going to prom with who and who did this on the
Yep.
playground, right? And so human nature goes back to that, instead of like, well, let's see if they're a good employee, rather than let's gossip because I heard that he was on his cell phone for when he was supposed to be doing X, Y, or Z, or that type of thing.
Yep. That brings me back to the core values.
Yeah.
How important is it for a company of any size to set core values?
I think it's the backbone. I like to say this is what you smell like, right? You,
Mm.
this is your DNA. This is embedded in who you are. And I think that when we look at our core values of an organization, we really want to make sure that we're choosing core values that are intrinsic and
Hmm.
exhibit everything that we are at this moment, not aspirational, not what we want to be, but who we are at this moment. And then we use those to hire, to fire, to recognize, to reward people. And you realize that just because somebody doesn't exhibit your core values doesn't necessarily mean that they're a bad person. They just might not be the right person for your organization. And I liken this
Mm.
all the time to dating, where I say, when I was single, I would go out on a date, and
Hmm.
this person wasn't a bad person. They just weren't the right person for me. They might have been a great person
Yep.
for my friend. There's a few times where I set my friend up with somebody I went out on a date with. And I
Yep.
and I think that in an organization, it's the same kind of thing. And these core values are that type of thermometer that we can use to make sure that the person that we're bringing in, or the person that's already in our organization, is the right person. If they're not going to be happy, and they should be an organization where their core values are spoken to more. For me at my organization, one of our major core values was customer first every single time. And we do crazy
Hmm.
things for our customers. I mean, crazy, people were flying on red eye flights and doing, last minute and doing all sorts of stuff. That's not for
Yep.
everybody. It's not for everybody. And we talk about that on the
Mm.
interview. And, some of those people were more well suited to work at a large corporation, where it was like, we are not going to jump through every hurdle for the customer. This is what our rules are. And that's okay. And we all know corporations like that. And we all do business with corporations like that. That just wasn't intrinsic to who we are, who we were. And that wasn't going to work at our organization. And so utilizing those core values to make sure that the right people are on the team can be life-changing for an organization.
What would you say to somebody who's started the process, got kind of set out their core values, and they have people on the team currently that don't fit those core values? Do you keep them on the team and hope that they're going to change, or is it something that you should evaluate and see if they should continue?
Yeah, it's symptomatic. This is a big symptom in organizations. You set the core values, and then you realize you have the wrong person in the right seat. And so you have
Hmm.
somebody who's great at their job. You have an AP person that just every check is paid on time, and they're executing and all those things. But the problem is, every time you turn around as a leader in an organization, they're a cancer to your organization. They're saying things behind your back. And
Hmm.
so, as important as it is that they're a great player, right? And they're great at
Yep.
their job, they don't have those core values, and it's not going to work. And if you think about this in terms of sports, you hear all the time things like, well, the chemistry in the clubhouse wasn't any good. Well, we had four players who were great players, but the chemistry was no good. Well, that's because you had the wrong person in the right seat. They didn't understand the core values of that team, and the team's never going to be high performing, even if that one person is high performing, because they're causing so many problems within the team and within the organization. And like I said, the same goes for sports as well.
Do you think that it's achievable to find all those people and to actually get the right people in the right seats? Or do you think that that's too hard? Like, I can see somebody saying, well, that sounds great, but I feel like that's going to be difficult to find the right person for the right seat. And like, how would you go about, like, would you ask those kinds of questions in an interview? You would. Okay.
In
So
fact,
I'll let you
yeah. In
speak.
fact, I was just recently in an interview where I asked them for examples of the core values. I said, here's a core value that's a core value at this organization. Tell me about when you've seen that core value at the organization you currently work at, or when you've seen that core value come
Mm,
into play at your life, or in an
yep.
organization that you're doing business with. And so we have to be testing for those things. We have to ask them on interviews, hey, can you do me a favor and define that? What does that mean to you? What does
Oh,
being
that's
humble
good.
mean? Please define that. Tell me, because you'll hear answers. Like I said, one of ours was customer first, and I remember I was sitting on an interview, and they told me I don't really know what that means. Okay, I define what
Hmm.
does that mean here at the organization. I've never seen that in my life. So I took an example that most people have dealt with, and I go, well, have you ever gone to Walgreens and had to wait in line? Oh, yes. For my mom's medication, they tell me.
Right.
Okay. And how did you feel about that? Well, I waited in line for like an hour and 20 minutes because they only had one person working and somebody else, was in the back and they didn't come up and help. How did you feel about that? Well, that's just how it is. That's how life is. And I said, so you don't understand then the value of customer first. Like you're not
Yeah.
going to be able to understand what we're trying to do here. Because if I was running Walgreens and that was my core value, that person in the back would be upfront ringing people up immediately. We'd call somebody,
Hmm.
from the front and say, hey, we need help. I wouldn't ever want my customers to be waiting in line for an hour and a half to get their medication because we were too slow to get it done. So these are questions that you have to ask and ask people to really dig into their own lives and where they've seen it in order to make sure that it's something that is intrinsic to them and they really understand the values.
That's really great. That's a great idea to ask those types of questions, especially if that is something that you're committed to and hiring somebody who aligns with all of your core values. I do think that it prevents issues further down the line, right? If you do that and get it, if you're hiring with people who have those same values from the get-go, you are saving yourself down the road. So maybe it takes a little bit longer to find somebody, but I know in my experience, since we've implemented this with you, I haven't really found that that's an issue. I feel like I've been able to find experience aligned with the core values. Just might take a little bit longer, a little bit more digging into resumes to find what you want, but I don't think it's an impossible thing to find.
And look, sometimes if somebody doesn't have this one skill that you're looking for, but they have the right core values, the skill might be able to be trained up. Skill
Oh,
might be able to
that's
be
great
trained up.
perspective.
But the core values, sometimes if they're that opposed to customer first or some kind of core value like that, it's going to be very hard to get them to change how they feel about that core value. So even if it's a skill that, hey, we could send them to a class, or I could spend an extra 3 hours and teach them this, that might be worth more of an investment than this is going to be a person who's not aligned with our core values. They're going to be gossiping. They're going to be a cancer to our organization,
Mhm.
but they're good at their job. So it's a weighing that as well.
That's great. As far as like the C-suite and leadership, do you recommend that they get involved with in groups with other leaders and C-suite members? Do you feel like there's any benefit to that?
Yeah, I mean, being in a peer group again has been life changing. Look, they showed me EOS. As I sold my company, I had a group of a personal board of directors that sat with me basically and through each step of the way and said, in our experience, we've seen this when a business sold, or you can expect this. I remember one of the piece of advice is somebody said to me in one of my peer groups, that I was in. This deal is going to fall apart 10 times before it actually goes through. So every time you feel like it's ready to fall apart, don't panic. It'll go through at some point, but it's going to keep falling apart. And if I didn't have that piece of advice, I would have been on an emotional roller coaster the entire time, because it did. There was, my lawyer's not agreeing with his lawyer, and you think, okay, this whole thing's done. And then next thing you know, the next day, okay, we made up, we're fine now on that point. But I would have been a wreck. So having people who've kind of been through things is so important, and that are going through things at the same time as you, that can give you feedback. And a lot of times people say, I only want to be in a group with people who are in my industry. And I can understand that, but there's also something to being in a group with people who have a different perspective and are outside of your industry. So I always tell the story. I had somebody in my group that owned a chain of orthodontia offices, and she would give feedback sometimes. And at first I was like, what? She's working with dentists and dental hygienists. What does she know about manufacturing or construction? But she's dealing with people, just like I'm dealing with people. And hey, I tried this with this person and it really worked well. Maybe this methodology might work well for you. But if I was so stubborn that I said, I'm only going to be with manufacturing people, or only going to be with construction people, I was never going to be able to get those alternative perspectives. And those alternative perspectives are so important. They're so important. And, sometimes people see things that you can't see.
That is a very good point. Okay, so as we wrap up, what is your best piece of business advice?
My best piece of business advice is back to those rules. Everybody needs to know what the rules are. We all need to be knowing where we're going and how we're going to get there and what we need to do to get there. Every person in your organization needs to know how they win the game of their position. Okay. And that means numbers. That means hitting their core values. That means fulfilling what's within their accountability chart. And if they can do that, you're going to have a successful organization, because everybody's going to be rowing in the same direction. If you think about it, if everybody could row in the same direction to the same goal, to the same place, you can probably take over any industry at any time.
Oh, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. That is a really important thing. And I think a huge struggle getting everyone to row in the same direction. So
yeah,
thank you for giving your insight. And thanks to this fly who's making an appearance on the podcast today. And of course, of all the times, right? But anyways, thank you so much, Michael, for joining us. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, send me an email. My email is Michael, Michael.Richman, Richman, at EOS, letter EOS worldwide, WORLDWIDE.com.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again. Appreciate it. It's always nice chatting with you. And I'm lucky enough to be able to ask you questions, since you are my current coach. So appreciate it. And thank you everyone for listening in.
All right. Thank you. Take care.